you will dramatically change your appearance, your performance, your health, and the quality of your life if you increase your superficial subcutaneous fat and your dermal white adipose tissue while simultaneously eliminating these other areas of fatty disease, visceral fat, muscle fat, heart fat, deep subcutaneous fat. Nothing will improve a human being more than doing precisely that.
If you're doing carnivore and are still struggling with belly fat, low energy, or stalled healing, this might be why. Today's guest is Dr. Sean O'Mara, one of the world's leading experts on visceral fat and metabolic health. He's famous for using advanced imaging to show people what's really happening inside your body, not just what the scale says, and for helping people reverse dangerous belly fat with carnivore and lifestyle changes. But here's the twist. After helping thousands of patients, he has discovered that carnivore alone is not always enough, and something important is often missing. So today we're diving into what actually works and how to get real lasting results. So grab a coffee, get comfy, and let's dive in. Dr. O'Mara, thank you so much for joining me today. Let's dive right in. Do you view visceral fat or belly fat, fat that accumulates around the organs, as an actual disease?
I do. I really do. And I think the best example of it is the fact that we're the only species in the planet that has visceral fat. It's present in incredibly small amounts in the wild, in normal, healthy animals. I'd like to see studies and see, something in between animals in the wild and Homo sapiens, like a zoo population, what happens. But another example of, say, a species that have an elevated amount would be domesticated cattle. So if you live healthy, you don't have it. And as you live incorrectly, or you're stressed out, or you're eating an improper diet, visceral fat accumulates. I will say, though, as a pure scientist, that it's also a different form of fat. That in humans, like infants, when they're born, they're born with a scant amount of visceral fat and fat around their heart, a very, very small amount. But that fat is different. And what we end up having in us as we age, and I'd like to say disease, we acquire more disease inside our bodies and become older, is a different form of fat. And so people sometimes just believe that this fat is normal and natural and healthy, and you want it. You want none of this. And if you want, if you're going to have some, you want it in a much healthier form, a tinier amount, and a completely different composition. So, if you're a hunter, pay attention to animals in the wild. They'll have very little of this fat around them. Some animals in the wild, if they get into, say, human food, especially if they're eating like crops like corn and other grains and things like that, they can begin to accumulate this fat around their heart and within their abdomen and have higher amounts, but they still have way less than humans end up with.
So on my channel, I talk a lot about healing because I healed with carnivore. I had, chronic illness symptoms and autoimmune symptoms. Now, do you think that visceral fat can lead to things like autoimmune symptoms and chronic illnesses, even in those that are, I guess you would say, skinnier? I mean, I was underweight, but do you think that that's something that could be connected?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So there's a misperception and misunderstanding out there that people that are thin can't have visceral fat, even if they have a very small amount. But I've seen it in really cachectic people that are incredibly thin, sarcopenic, maybe even have cancer, emaciated, and look super thin. And then they have this large amount of fat inside of them. So visceral fat absolutely can be present in a very thin person with a small body mass index of say, 16, 17. You can still have this fat within your abdomen and fat around your heart and filling your organs, muscle and things. So yeah, I think that's part of the misperception out there about visceral fat. that this internal fat can only be present in people that appear outwardly heavy. And so we have a name for that. We call them TOFIs, thin outside, fat inside. And it really amounts to the fact that they have the majority of their fat will be carried on the inside where it's invisible and you just simply can't see it unless you get an MRI scan. Now, because of the experience I've had doing so many MRIs, I can see the influence outwardly, manifestations of visceral fat in people's faces. And it's not so much that they accumulate fat within their face, but the influence of this fat, ongoing physiological influence from the cytokines and the inflammatory molecules that visceral fat and the other correlated fat depots of epicardial fat, fat around the heart, and then myosteatosis, which is fat within the muscle. Those are all three of them are actively secreting inflammatory molecules. And so the mere existence of the fat is not the problem. It's the inflammatory molecules that it secretes. And so you could take a large amount of fat and put it inside somebody, and they look exactly the same until eventually the influence, if it was active, the influence of that inflammation would begin to change their face. And also, if you have a surgery where it was possible to remove all your visceral fat, you're not going to see an immediate change in somebody's face or appearance. First of all, I don't know of any surgeries that really are effective at doing that. But it's the point I'm trying to make is that these fat depots, these inflammatory areas of disease, it's the influence of them, not the mere existence. So the longer you've had it within you, and the more you have, the more influence and more likely that you're going to have consequential downstream disease from these disease. But you're correct in the presumption that this really is disease inside the body.
Quick break because I have to share something that I've been loving lately. I have tried so many electrolyte powders over the years, and honestly, most of them either have junk ingredients, they have a weird aftertaste, or they mess with my gut. SALTR is the way electrolytes should be made. It has super clean, unrefined Norwegian sea salt that's naturally rich in minerals and tests lower in heavy metals than other brands. They use magnesium glycinate and potassium gluconate, so it's actually absorbable and gentler on your gut. And get this, even the citric acid is used from real fruit like dates and pomegranates and not corn or other industrial byproducts, which is really important to me because I'm really sensitive to ingredients and I don't have any issues with these. SALTR electrolytes are also lightly sweetened with stevia leaf extract and just enough to taste. My absolute favorite flavor right now is tart lime, but I've also been loving their salted caramel coffee flavor. It's actually what I have in my cup right now. I use 16 ounces of hot water and I stir in 1 packet of salted caramel coffee electrolytes. It is just delicious. They also have grapefruit and unflavored. So if you don't want any stevia or any flavors, this is the one for you. It's just sea salt and electrolytes. If you want to try SALTR for yourself, click on the link in the description below or use code LaurenJ at checkout to save 10%. Now let's get back to this interview. I definitely noticed once I lost inflammation that like all my symptoms went away, and I did the carnivore diet, and that's, meat-based is kind of the focus. And I noticed it was within a few weeks that I was almost completely better. And they say inflammation is the root of all disease, but could it also be visceral fat, because it's all connected?
I think it is connected. And I think, inflammation uh, breeds and contributes to visceral fat. So before visceral fat even exists, you have disease in the form, in my opinion, the very first thing that goes wrong, even before visceral fat begins to accumulate, is a dysbiotic disease microbiome. So your microbiome is suboptimal, it's diseased, and it's contributing to visceral adiposity, the formation of fat within your abdomen, within your muscles, and around your heart. In the absence of a diseased suboptimal microbiome, what your microbiome does when it's appropriately healthy is it stores fat in a much more benign and even protective and beneficial form, which is superficial subcutaneous fat. And that's a fat depot that I'd like to show for the sake of your followers what it actually looks like. So in this MRI scan behind me here, this is an abdomen. This is the belly button within the this MRI scan. The person is laying on their back, so these are their back muscles, which are filled with fat themselves. These are the erectospinae muscles that keep your back erect. And you can see this large amount of fat depositing with the muscles. And when we see a lot of this muscle fat, we know we're going to see a lot of visceral fat and vice versa. So at the belly button, the person's laying on their back, and this is all visceral fat. But the beneficial fat is really something that I feel very strongly about, needs to be talked about as much in part of the conversation as visceral fat as well. I mean, this bad type of fat. So this is subcutaneous fat collectively in one compartment, but it actually is made up of two different compartments. And there's this black line going around here, very thin black line, pretty faint. And this little tiny area here is superficial subcutaneous fat. And that's the beneficial fat that actually protects you from disease, because I hope all your followers will write this down. Adiponectin, Adiponectin. So adiponectin is a molecule that's secreted by your body, and it's stored principally in that one fat depot that protects you from chronic disease. So your incidence of mortality and prevalence of disease is markedly lower when you have adequate amounts of adiponectin. And so it's really important that you maintain your superficial subcutaneous fat. But this other compartment, which is deep to this black line, which is called Scarpa's membrane, this compartment is called deep subcutaneous fat. And so deep subcutaneous fat behaves like visceral fat, which behaves like muscle fat, which behaves like fat around the heart. So there's really four bad players, four fat areas of disease: heart fat, muscle fat, visceral fat, deep subcutaneous fat. And then there's this beneficial area of fat called superficial subcutaneous fat. And related to it also is a small layer of fat called dermal white adipose tissue. And dermal white adipose tissue is up against and adjacent to superficial subcutaneous fat. And, women and men listening want to have superficial subcutaneous fat and dermal white adipose tissue because they're protective. Dermal white adipose tissue literally becomes a fertilizer bed for your skin, being your largest organ. And so you end up with healthier skin just as a consequence of having adequate dermal white adipose tissue. So I think it's really important. I try to educate people about that and dissuade them from what conventional healthcare wants them to be distracted by, which is cholesterol and blood studies. And, nobody follows their cholesterol panel and lipids and ever actually improves their body, their health. They might think they're doing something good. Their doctors might tell them they're doing something good. They won't feel it. They won't see it. They won't experience it. But if you increase your superficial subcutaneous fat and your dermal white adipose tissue, while simultaneously eliminating these other areas of fatty disease, visceral fat, muscle fat, heart fat, deep subcutaneous fat, you will dramatically change your appearance, your performance, your health, and the quality of your life. Nothing, and I stake my entire professional reputation on this, will improve a human being more than doing precisely that. So, with a modest investment in an MRI scan targeting these areas, you will have, in effect, the single greatest collection of biomarkers for optimizing yourself in the history of humanity.
I think that knowing that information is so valuable. And I've watched some of your other videos, and you have said that MRIs are way more important than, blood testing, cholesterol markers, and that sort of thing. Why do you think more doctors don't do this?
Well, I think it's, first of all, not their fault. They simply don't know about it. If you walked up to Sean O'Mara um, 17 years ago or 16 years ago and talked to me about visceral fat, I would have reacted exactly like all the other doctors react today who don't know anything about it. And the reason no other doctors know about it is, Lauren, because it's not taught in medical school. And that's not just coincidental. It's by design. If we can keep this visceral fat, this is the perspective of big pharma, and those that benefit the most from conventional healthcare, if they can keep visceral fat, heart fat, muscle fat, and beneficial fat like superficial subcutaneous fat from being taught to physicians, the physicians won't be able to use it to help out their patients. And so disease progresses, and it's remarkable, as intelligent as these doctors are, it's actually super impressive and admirable in its evil design, how incredibly effective this is in 8 billion people. The number of people who actually are effectively following these biomarkers amount to a few hundred out of 8 billion people. And so if you look at the mortality rates of physicians, they basically die in disease at roughly the same rate as average people. But if you look at those who are informed about these fat depots, they live way longer and live way better. And so I think the big answer, the realistic answer is doctors just don't know about it. But I'm beginning to predict what's going to happen is lawyers are going to find out about how deadly this fat is, and they're going to sue doctors because doctors aren't reading this. And it doesn't matter that physicians haven't been taught this. The courts will step in under case law. I'm an attorney, or at least I was an attorney. I don't practice law anymore. But under a very interesting legal case called Helig versus Carey, and in that a landslide, or watershed case, very important, the courts found liability to a doctor who was pleading that they didn't have to do something because it wasn't standard of care. In other words, um, it's not recognized as something that we need to do in the practice of medicine, that's standard of care. But the courts will say, well, we will say it should be standard of care if it's easy to do, it doesn't expose the patient to any harm, it's not terribly expensive, and the outcome is grave if it's not done. And every one of those conditions for Helig are met with respect to visceral fat, heart fat, and muscle fat, and deep subcutaneous fat. So I'm predicting that the lawyers will step in. Yes, it will be self-serving from the standpoint they will make a lot of money, but they will actually benefit and provide benefits to humanity because they will usher in and expedite the education of these deadly fat depots within medical schools, because the insurance companies will insure and make it mandatory that doctors start reading these areas of fat. So if anybody is listening today and they ever had an MRI scan or a CT scan, and then recently dropped and had a heart attack, within a reasonable period of time, they would have a case that they could discuss with a malpractice attorney for missing that. So I'm increasing my tone about the urgency of this because somebody's mom and dad are going to die or get cancer or suffer egregious harm because this is not being taught and it's being ignored. And I recognize that I'm just one person in the face of 1 million doctors in America. And there are about 10 right now that I know of that are who work with me that read this. But 10 out of 1 million, Lauren, it's time we figure out a way to get this expedited.
So, what are the best ways that someone can reduce the visceral fat in their body?
So one of the very best ways to do it is cut out processed foods. So I actually have a nice example of that for your followers to take a look at. And this is the only time it was ever done in the history of the world where we scanned a 70-year-old and you can see the visceral fat. It's kind of a reddish color here. And you can see his fat within his muscles, the sides of his abdomen. And he cut out processed foods, and within 2 weeks, without going to medical school and without being a radiologist, all your followers will be able to conclude in just 2 weeks, he reduced his visceral fat and he reduced that chunk of fat within his muscles. This is remarkable that in 2 weeks of an intervention, simply cutting out processed foods, this individual dramatically improved their health in such a short period of time. But after 35 weeks, you could see they are dramatically different. They now have a six pack, they have, abs, their muscles grew, and they're dramatically improved, and all of their muscle fat is gone now, completely gone. And so muscle becomes burdened by disease. And the simple reason and answer to why somebody needs a cane and then a walker and then a wheelchair and eventually they're bedridden is not because they're old, but because they are diseased. And the most undiagnosed influential disease in that scenario is the accumulation of this inflammatory fat within the muscles of a human being that go completely undiagnosed and ignored by physicians and unfortunately their patients that are coming to them. And so my recommendation is first start eating clean, cut out processed foods altogether. And then I have another example, a little list, and we'll pull it up here so that your followers can take a screenshot of this list and begin using the other strategies to help eliminate their visceral fat and muscle fat and heart fat. So if you, in addition to cutting out processed foods, if you also eliminate carbohydrates, that will accelerate it as well. There's more alignment to visceral fat and muscle fat and deep subcutaneous fat and heart fat with the consumption of carbohydrates, especially processed carbohydrates. And then I recommended a meat-centric diet. We noticed after studying for 7 years, funding through the National Science Foundation, that people who eat mostly a meat-centered diet eliminated this disease faster than those that were plant-based. Now, it doesn't mean you cannot eliminate visceral fat eating plants and even being vegan and vegetarian. You can, but it was expedited. We saw it leave more quickly. And so I'm a health optimized physician. I could recommend any diet out there, but I'm going to recommend the one that gets the best results so that my client patients end up with the best results and go out and tell other people. So you eliminate these deadly areas of disease inside your body with a meat centric diet. And then also consuming wild caught seafood and consuming at the same time that you're eating these fermented foods. And fermented foods are absolutely invaluable and essential to contribute to your microbiome. So, for the first time in our country's history and in the world's history, we have a government that is, unfortunately, it's our government, the United States government, recommending to every American to consume fermented foods to improve their microbiome. And this is an earthquake. This is an enormously consequential and important first step that big pharma and conventional healthcare, those that are in the know, are going to be greatly troubled at the notion of promoting fermented foods and attention to the microbiome, because it's through that targeting and awareness that we are going to have the single greatest impact in helping people get better. And thirdly, I recommend doing some form of regular extended fasting, starting out slow and working your way up over a number of months to a point that you are maybe 6 months down the road, uh, fasting regularly 3 days a week, not eating 72 hours straight, zero caloric consumption, just drinking water. And you can also have non caloric um, uh, beverages like water with a little bit of kimchi brine in it, but not kimchi vegetables, which are caloric, but just a little bit of the brine, the liquid that comes, that fermented foods come in, and then some form of maximum intensity exercise. My favorite is sprinting, maybe doing some push ups and pull ups and squats to exhaustion, where you get short of breath. And so the form of exercise that we see most positively contributes to the elimination most effectively of this structural disease is are those that engage in flight or fight type of exercise. So sprinting and fighting, lifting weights, lifting heavy things, as opposed to more cardio or aerobic activity. So the defining feature of maximum intensity is an exercise that produces shortness of breath within a very short period of time through anaerobic metabolism, the production of lactate, a lowering of the pH, and basically an induced acidemia from that lactate, where your body has to correct that lactate accumulation through the off gassing of carbon dioxide. And it's manifested by shortness of breath. So when you increase your acid, and you increase it sufficiently that your body says this is disruption, you get short of breath to blow off CO2 to help compensate for that. So maximum intensity exercise, and then embrace stress hormesis, cold plunging, a hot, dry, finished sauna, and then I end with optimizing your microbiome through ferments and other practices. I like to drink natural water that's like from a well, and natural bodies of water, like pristine lakes, like the Lake of the Woods that borders between Canada and the United States, where you can still drink the water there, and then glacier water, and even ocean water. Lauren, when you were a child, you were knocked over by waves. You would swallow that ocean water. And I like to point out that, there's one population in the world that you could follow that just don't get obese. They remain attractive because they're healthy. And they typically, the males and females that are in this population look attractive. And who they are surfers. So surfers involuntarily wipe out and consume a big mouthful of water, and that regular ingestion of the ocean water teeming with beautiful microbes offers a magnificent source of optimizing your microbiome and in a safe way. I see no case reports of anybody that's swallowed a mouthful of ocean water and dropped dead. So lots of examples of Homo sapiens having, been exposed to unintentionally drinking water, and it certainly is a pretty regular practice within the surfing community. But girl surfers, women surfers are attractive, and male surfers are healthy and attractive looking because of that regular contribution. And I would say to all the carnivores out there who are eating meat and doing nothing else and not eating ferments, that they're missing out on this opportunity to optimize their microbiome. Recently, I was on with a Homestead Now podcast with Carrie, and he, on my insistence, gave it a try and started drinking just vegetable brine, just the liquid runoff without any vegetables. And he was drinking them out of a martini glass, which I thought was interesting. And those microbes didn't have oxalates, they don't have lectins, they don't have toxins, plant toxins, any of the objectionable, aspects to vegetables and plants that most within the carnivore community are terrified. It's just the bacteria used to ferment those vegetables, and sometimes it's fruit and other things that make such a beneficial contribution to your microbiome. So carnivores should be out there doing that. My justification for doing so is that our ancestors would have been drinking creek water and river water and lake water, teeming with microbes. And we would have field dressed animals, and we didn't have soaps, we didn't have disinfectants. And literally, the microbiome from that particular animal, from its hide when we would skin it, would be transferred to the flesh of that animal and the meat, and then consumed, not intentionally, the microbes, but the meat would be consumed. And so the notion that, our ancestors somehow didn't have microbiome rich variety being deposited in their lives daily is just a lack of knowledge on the part of modern day carnivores. And we're really kind of eating a processed form of the what our ancestors ate. Even if you're eating meat and only meat, you're not getting those microbes. So hopefully, for those carnivores followers of your followers, that they would entertain eating what I like to promote, which is the living diet, which can be followed by both carnivores and vegans. So I have vegan clients that will not eat meat. I get them eating fermented vegetables when they eat their whole, whole form of vegetables, and they improve. They start eliminating visceral fat, albeit at a slower rate than the carnivores do. But carnivores need to back off these vegans. They do get better. And those vegans eating fermented foods, they're improving better than carnivores not eating the getting those microbes in them. So it's pretty alarming how much the microbiome is deficient in people today, and how we really need to promote it.
So, a lot of the people in my community come to carnivore for healing, like I mentioned, but they're also very sensitive. So, I share a lot about my story with histamine intolerance, and I had full blown MCAS symptoms for quite a while, and I still can't do ferment like sauerkraut juice. I try, a little bit. What is your suggestion for someone to get started, maybe to increase how much they're eating so that they can start seeing some progress
Yeah,
while being
no,
very sensitive?
yeah, very common. Histamine intolerance is of enormous uh, prevalence. And if you talk to doctors about it, they tell you to avoid histamine. Well, you can't really avoid histamine altogether. You can avoid histamine rich meats and foods and things. But histamine is part of your body's immune system. And so when you have signs of histamine intolerance, you have by definition a a disorder of your immune system. I mean, your mast cells, which are an important part of your immune system, release histamine. And so the answer, Lauren, to you and for others struggling with histamine intolerance is to optimize your microbiome. So what you want to do is borrow a page from science and what we do with desensitization of known allergies, people that are intolerant of certain foods like peanuts, bee venom, bee stings, things like that. We expose them to incredibly small amounts of these substances over a period of time until they acquire a tolerance and ability to absorb it. Now, what's even more effective in the case of histamine intolerance from fermented foods is that you not just get exposed to small amounts of the particular antigen, but you become colonized by the microbes that are associated with that particular food. And when you're adequately colonized through engraftment, meaning those microbes start residing within your gastrointestinal microbiome, they will assist the host in being more tolerant of that histamine. But until that happens, you will struggle with a histaminic response to the histamine present in those foods. So the real answer is to take teeny tiny little bits of the fermented foods to acquire an infection, and just to let you know how incredibly small this can be to get an infection. Were I to have influenza today, and I had active flu, and I was right next to you instead of transmitting this through the internet, and I coughed a little bit, the smallest little bit of spit came out of my mouth and went into your glass, and you drank it. You couldn't even see it. You would never be able to taste it, but you'd get a dramatic infection from it. These microbes are so small and they can reproduce that you don't have to have large quantities of this for engraftment and for you to become colonized. So take teeny tiny bits. I have a video that people can take a look at in my YouTube channel for free. Just Google Dr. Sean O'Mara, histamine intolerance YouTube, and you can watch that video where I give some helpful guidance to people like yourself that have histamine intolerance.
Now, if there's someone that is ready to get started losing visceral fat or healing and losing inflammation, what is the piece of advice that you would leave them with?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I would recommend that they get an MRI scan and take a look at it. People that get a DEXA scan will end up with a number, but they rarely ever do much with that number. It's not very influential. But when you get a scan, Lauren, and you see a chunk of this inflammatory, deadly disease around your heart, it's really life changing and it gets your attention and you'll do something about it. So, MRIs today are actually pretty reasonable if you pay cash. I think the average cost is around $250 to $300 cash pay around the country. We will read that scan. Right now, we have a special, it's $900 to read the MRI scan and to do coaching on you for, I think it's 1 or maybe 2 months to help you eliminate that fat. We don't want to just, I think it's unethical for a radiologist to read a disease that nobody knows how to get rid of and tell them you got cancer and then you send them out. So we include in our readings treatment plans to get rid of it. Now, I will get out of that business and just read it as soon as other people know effectively other physicians are out there. Or if the physicians don't do it, other professionals will step in. I would submit to, it's an interesting theory, personal trainers could start, you know, reading MRI scans, in my opinion, and treating it. And because in virtually every state, for there to be a prosecution for the practice of medicine without a license, you need a doctor to step forward and say, this is the practice of medicine. But what if there is no doctor to opine as an expert witness because nobody else is doing it? That is the dilemma of today. So if doctors don't step up and start doing this, some other profession is going to step up in their absence to save the millions of lives that are dying because this is going undiagnosed. So I recommend people that are interested in getting an MRI scan could go to one of my websites, which is growingbetter.older.com/ultimate start, all one word, ultimate start. And you can click on it, on that web link, and it will tell you how you can get an MRI scan, and then how you can sign up for this program or work with my practice. If people are interested in having a full body scan and working one-on-one with me or one of my doctors for a whole day, we do very intensive consultations for people that want to come to us either in Naples, Florida, or Minneapolis, Minnesota. They can go to just my website, drshanomara.com, DRSEANOMARA.com, and click on Working with Dr. Sean, and find out information about working one-on-one with me or one of my other physician partners.
Dr. Sean, thank you for sharing all of these insights and all this great information on how we can actually finally find healing or lose the fat that we want to lose so that we can just feel better and be our best selves. I really appreciate all this information that you shared today.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for having me on and being able to share this with your audience. And I look forward to coming back again if you'd like.
Absolutely. Friends, if you enjoyed this conversation, don't forget to tap the like button and hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And come hang out with me on Instagram and TikTok. I share more real life moments, behind the scenes, what I eat in a day on a carnivore diet, and more about my healing journey. And thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next time.